Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Richards. Today in this election special I'm talking to candidates for Boston and Skegness. They are Matt Warman for the Conservatives, Paul Kenny for Labour and Robin Hunter-Clark for UKIP. We also invited Lynn Luxton, who's standing independently, and the incumbent Conservative Member of Parliament, Mark Simmons. They couldn't be with us, I'm afraid. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Could I start off with an issue that's very important in this constituency particularly, which is migration and people moving in. Robin, your party wants to chuck everybody out, don't you?
No, we don't actually. What we want is a very sensible system, like they have in Australia, a points-based immigration system, whereby actually it would be less discriminatory than it is at the moment, because at the moment we actually have an open border with the EU countries. We would extend that to the rest of the world and actually have a fairer system all round. But we do have to control our borders, and that's something that's very close to the heart of people in Boston and Skegness.
But this constituency, the agricultural business here especially, wouldn't work without all this.
I totally agree, but there are lots of local people that can't get a job working on the land like they used to. So we have to give the opportunity for local people, first and foremost, to have those jobs, and then if there are vacancies, that should be extended to people from all over the world.
Well, why is it that local people, why are people coming here then, in that case, if there aren't jobs on the land? If local people can't get that work,
the employers aren't allowing it. It's basically wage compression. The employers can get cheaper labour from people in EU countries.
So if I'm an employer in your constituency, what you hope is your constituency, then you're going to tell me, no, you're not allowed to employ the equally qualified, but cheaper employee. You'll stop me having that freedom to negotiate for myself in the market.
Local people should have those jobs first. I think that's common sense.
Robin, I beg your pardon, Paul.
Well, I think the issue has kind of been going on in the constituency for the last 10 years or more, yeah. We've seen a lot of issues in there, but I think we really do need to come down with some kind of really sound policies about the future. And it seems to me that what we really need to be doing is certainly looking at the issue regarding people who are bringing employment into the region. We certainly need to get rid of zero-hour contracts. We certainly need to get rid of...
So how does this apply to migration?
Well, the big issue that you've got is at Boston at the present time, when you talk about the number of labour that's coming in, is that we've got employers bringing people into the town, and because they don't give them proper contracts, we've got some people who go into work on a Monday morning, they get told they get sent home. So we have a scenario where we have lots of people who haven't got any work really, but they're on a zero-hour contract. It's meaningless. They're false jobs. So we need to actually get rid of those. But the other thing we also need to do is that we also need, in a sense, to also get rid of some of the employment agencies which are single nationalities. And there are issues where we need to actually, and if there is any kind of discrimination, we need to get rid of that. But we also need to kind of have the right climate. I mean, one of the big issues that we've got in the town, certainly within Boston, and you know, it's kind of spreading really, is the whole issue about HMOs, and we need to have licensing of HMOs.
HMOs?
Houses of multiple occupation, because we've got thousands of people living in houses in our town that are overcrowded, and they're not in good accommodation, so we need a proper process. So we need to actually find out who lives in those properties, and we also, at the same time, need to find out who the landlords. But one of the other issues we really need to do, and one of the big issues that we don't know the population of the town. So what we need to do, because we know in the 2011 census, it didn't record them all. So what we need to do is when people come to Boston or Skegness, we need to make sure they go to the local authority, they register with the local authority. And until they've done that, I actually think we actually need to be saying probably not giving them any services. Not that I want to deny services to people, but we can't have people moving into our communities if we don't know the population that lives there. Because it's not good for the local people, and it's not good for the local authorities, it's not good for your health, and it's not good for education. We need to actually know the numbers of the population that we're there, because we can't talk to government about getting grants and settlements and delivering services without actually knowing the population.
Matt, migrants registering before they can get any services.
I think that's a whole different debate. We don't want to live in a country where people have to tell, how are you going to implement this? We don't want to live in a country where people have to turn up at their local police station to say, hi, I'm here. On the broader issue of migration, I think Robin raises some very fair points, actually, is that we have a migration policy where, for instance, London, Birmingham, Manchester have been able to absorb huge changes in population. Places such as Boston, and I've seen how Boston has changed over the last 20 years, huge shifts, but simply because a migrant workforce that previously would come seasonally now stays, and that puts pressure on services. It puts the social tensions in place that simply didn't exist before. So Robin raises some reasonable issues, but the idea that there is an army of British people that is waiting to do the work simply isn't the case. And if you look at why local businesses are recruiting from abroad, and I don't want to see them recruiting directly from abroad, but they're doing it simply because it's the only way they're able to get access to that labour. And the problem with the ideas that UKIP are coming up with, to my mind, is what you're talking about is pushing up the wages, which means pushing up the price of the food that you and I buy in supermarkets. And you talk to someone like Mark Reckless, a former Conservative MP, now a UKIP MP, he said, well, of course, we'll simply import more food. Well, yeah, he's right. With a UKIP policy, we would import more food. It would cost more. It would mean a poorer local economy here. What we need is sophisticated solutions to complicated problems. And I'm afraid it's only a Conservative government that's going to offer.
The fact is, Hugh, the only way we can control our borders is by leaving the European Union. And these two parties have betrayed us on that issue for years. Yes, you have betrayed us. It was in your 2010 manifesto to give us a referendum, as it was in the Conservatives. We are the only party that can deliver that by having UKIP members of Parliament elected in there.
Just, we'll come on to the European Union, Robin. I suspect that you'd like to speak about that. But what about that point that it would push up food prices if you were to have the labour price controls, as it were, that you're suggesting?
I just don't agree with that point at all. I mean, what's happening at the moment is you've got people coming over here from Eastern Europe, and they're being paid sort of £2 an hour, because what the employers are doing is taking the minimum wage, and then they're taking money off them for accommodation and food, and I think that's wholly unfair. It shouldn't be allowed to happen.
That simply isn't true. People have to buy food, whether they're on the minimum wage or not. That's a very straightforward national policy. There is a minimum wage that everyone has to be paid.
But one of the things that we also need to be doing, our big supermarkets put massive demands on our food industry in Lincolnshire. And we need to make sure that we talk to them so that they actually know. But one of the problems about the whole issue about immigration within the constituency, we had a major report done on it in Boston. And I have to say, on the council where they ignored most of it. So, I mean, I actually chaired a task and finish group, and some of the key recommendations they ignored, and the people of Boston actually felt betrayed, because a lot of the things that they actually spoke about, they actually felt that the council had ignored them. And now that's not the way to do politics. This election is about an election where whoever you stand, you've got to stand up and fight for the people that you represent.
If I may, some of the issues that were raised in that report, however, were things such as, let's reform the welfare benefit system so that it is less attractive to top up low wages and come up from abroad to this country than it is from, for instance, to go to Germany or to France. We need a level playing field across Europe, and to be able to say areas that come under huge pressure, such as Boston and Skegness, have access to a fund from central government that supports those unique conditions. Now, those were in the report, and they're now a part of Conservative policy.
Well, I've been down to Parliament, and I've spoken at a select committee, the all-party committee on migration, and we've asked them to ask the government, and what we got back, zero. I mean, the scenario.
What you've got is a Conservative policy that said
employers have a responsibility to pay people a living wage, and we've got to support them to do that. But I'm sorry, there are local people that want work, and that's the people that I'm standing up for.
And we've also got to bring in the living wage as well, because
yes,
one
we
of the
have,
problems
absolutely.
in Boston, people are paid too low.
Yeah.
And every time I've been there up at one of the local authorities, Boston, all the Tory councillors reject it every time. They're not listening to the.
But we're the only party that can beat the Conservatives in this.
I just want to bring in a slightly different angle to the issue here, which is membership of the European Union itself. Robin's already said what we all expect him to say on that subject. But Matt, Conservative Party seems quite torn down the middle as far as Europe's concerned. Which side do you stand? Are you a Eurosceptic or are you a Europhile?
I think we've got actually what's a very clear policy, which is essentially the idea that we had in 1975 of Europe as a fundamentally economic union, its access to a common market. That is something that a huge number of people think is good for Britain. What we've seen over the last 40 years is a Europe that has changed so fundamentally that it is right to go to Europe, to renegotiate, to say, what is the best Europe that's on the table? put that to a new referendum.
What
and
would
that-
it change with this renegotiation? The Prime Minister, the leader of your party, has talked about this renegotiation. He hasn't been very specific about it, though. What would that be?
Where on Robin's point, of course we can renegotiate
No,
because it's in
the leaders in
interest
Brussels
of
have said no negotiation.
No, they haven't.
Angela Merkel has said
it's in the interest of France and Germany to have a Britain in the European Union because they need us as much as we need them on some issues. So you've got that as one side of it. Where are the red lines? I think migration is an absolutely crucial red line. I think the ability to have control over our own laws is an absolutely crucial red line. But the point is Europe just all bad? Should we throw the baby out with the bathwater? That to me seems a nonsensical position. You have
But
to
we've
say
got, a
what's the
scenario,
best
we've got a scenario at the present time where, let's be honest, every time our Prime Minister goes over to Europe, they don't listen to him.
Of course they don't.
He
They don't-
vetoed an
they-
EU treaty.
no,
he secured a cut in the budget.
no,
He's been
okay.
harder
It's all
on
the
Europe than
calm.
Margaret Thatcher.
If he is as kind of solid as he is, he would have won more kind of things. He hasn't. They laugh at him. You know, to a certain extent, he's just swanning round there. He goes in there. You can watch him. I mean, if you watched over the last couple of years, Merkel's shied away from him. She come over, she's trying to there, but they don't really want to listen.
We'll come back to this after the break. We will have to stop. We'll have to stop there, but we will come back to it. Come back after the break, please, for more Hot Topic. Welcome back to Hot Topic Election Special. I'm with the candidates of Boston and Skegness. They are Matt Warman for the Conservatives, Paul Kenny for Labour and Robin Hunter-Clark for UKIP. We were interrupted there just talking about the European Union. Paul, you were suggesting that the Prime Minister just goes over there, swans around and nobody
It's not
listens to him.
taken seriously. I mean, within Europe at the present
We
time.
need Nigel.
Well, you might say, I don't think you go down to well either. At the end of the day, my scenario is, and the party's situation is that we do realise that there are issues that we do need to look in Europe, and I am delighted.
But you won't offer us a referendum.
No, but you've got to let me
You're not
finish.
offering us a free and fair referendum.
Well,
I'm
one of the
sorry.
things is that one of the things that we've got within Juncker is just took over. One of the things he's looking loads of issues around migration and other big issues. What we've got to get in there is negotiate. I tell you, before we start going into any kind of a maverick kind of a stance on Europe, we actually have to understand what's benefit to this country. And one of the things that we have at the present time is that we know, and you've only got to talk to local industries in Boston and Skegness, is that Europe is an important part of their business. If you look at the food
It
industry...
is, and we want to have a free trade
so,
agreement
but
with
at
the
the end of the
European
day,
Union.
but at the end of the day, if you want to kind of leave, where are you going to take us to?
But going back to this
Rob,
referendum,
Rob.
I'm sorry, the Conservative referendum that's being offered is a complete con. It's not an in-out referendum. They're on about having one in 2017 if David Cameron becomes Prime Minister. It's going to be about whether we like the way things are at the moment or this new renegotiation package. That is not an in-out referendum.
Just to correct.
That's all.
It is an absolutely
con.
clear in or out referendum.
I was a
And
member
you
of the Conservative Party in
Please,
2009.
just let
I'm
him
sorry.
go.
It is an absolutely clear, this is the best Europe on offer, in or out. And it seems to me to be crazy to suggest that we should simply say the Europe that we've got now isn't working, so let's just get out. We have to acknowledge that there are benefits to local businesses, to local consumers, to the whole of the country, to being part of a form of Europe, but we have to be open-minded to the idea that we could also leave.
Robin, can I just put a point to you? One of the reasons that UKIP has become so popular so recently is because people dislike being governed. They feel over-governed, overtaxed, over-regulated, and it really doesn't matter where the government is, whether it's in Westminster or whether it's in Brussels. It just happens that Brussels is a convenient xenophobic whipping boy. It's really a matter of a sort of perhaps perfectly legitimate and respectable libertarianism rather than an issue of
It
Europe.
does, because at least, when we elect MPs, they're electable. The European Commission is not elected. It's undemocratic.
I think you're also bringing a fair point around about the whole issue about democracy.
Yeah.
We've seen what's happened in Scotland, and actually the whole issue about devolution has got to come to England as well. And what we've really got to do is we've got to make sure that from central government, some of these powers there. And I think the problem is far too often it's been controlled at the centre, and we've then got to bring it there.
I mean, that seems, again, it comes down to the sort of fickle, capricious randomness of nationalism, doesn't it? Why Scotland, England, why should those be the units of authority and sovereignty? Why should it not be East Midlands? Or why should it not be, Boston, Skegness not be city-states?
I want to bring devolution back to that. I want to actually make things people in their ward, in their street, have real say about what happens, you know, so they can decide where the bus stop goes, you know what kind of services in their local community. And at the end of the day, it's about delivering. Well, your UKIP policy talks about taking houses out of rural areas. Have you spoke to anybody?
We don't want massive housing developments in some of our rural villages. No, we don't, because we haven't got the infrastructure. We haven't got the places for doctor surgeries.
You obviously haven't realised that the housing strategy.
We should allow people to decide whether they want huge housing developments.
We need homes in Boston and Skegness. We don't need you lot
taking them away. Massive housing development in our small rural villages.
Have you ever gone and spoke to
Against
people?
the will of the people, yes, I have actually.
Gentlemen, Paul, the housing issue is a point, though, isn't it? You even say that if there were no migration into this part of the world, you know, people are still affectionate. The population is growing, and we don't have enough housing anyway. Now, if you're not going to put them on a field, where are you going to put them?
These decisions should be down to local people to decide.
Well,
and if people do not want housing developments in their small village, that's up to them.
But that's what you're not.
It's happening in
saying
Sibsey, it's happening in Stickney in this constituency. I'm working with them to stop massive housing developments. So we haven't got the road infrastructure, we haven't got the jobs, we haven't got.
When you say people don't want housing developments, presumably that doesn't include the people who want to live in them.
But there's no jobs for these people. There's no jobs. You've got to have the infrastructure first, then you build the houses, not the other way around. That's
On a couple
crazy.
of points of fact, there are still very much vacancies in Boston, there are still very much vacancies in Skegness. So when he says there aren't the jobs, I'm not sure where that's coming from.
There aren't the jobs.
You just said there weren't. Where you've got the issue around housing, it seems to me, is you need obviously a plan that is developed with local communities. And if you go to local communities, you very often find that they're saying, we know where the sites are within a village where we could put small development. Where you come up against problems is central government saying, let's put 3,000 houses here.
That's
I
what's
think
happening.
you need government at the right level rather than just
We've got
let's have...
massive housing lists in East Lindsey and Boston, and at the end of the day, you know, if you sat on some of these local authorities, because you only sit on the county council.
I also sit on my town council as well,
but you also might want to kind of go and look at what East Lindsey are doing.
Well, I am, yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to it, we don't want you put in these kind of narrow-minded views on housing. And now I take the point that people have the right to make a comment, and I fully
All I'm
support
doing
that.
is standing up for the people.
But at the end of the day, what you're also going to do is stop growth in this constituency. Is that the way you want to represent? Is that the way you want to represent us?
We want investment, then and jobs investment, and then.
How many jobs then?
We want a lot more jobs.
What kind of jobs?
Then we build the houses. That's the way it works. Not the other way around. You don't build the houses and then try and find jobs. That's a crazy way of doing
But
things.
if you want investment, you need a serious, credible government that is based on an economic track record. And I think what we have to be able to do is sit there and say, if you're going to make a serious decision that decides on a national government, yes, we want a group of Lincolnshire MPs working together to stand up for the interests of Lincolnshire in
And that's
Westminster.
worked well so far, hasn't it?
And that means saying, why is Skegness still an hour from a dual carriageway? Why doesn't Boston have a distributor road or a bypass or whatever you want to call it? It means standing up for infrastructure, but it also means setting that in the context of a serious economic crisis.
Far too long.
This-
You know, we've been waiting. We've been waiting.
We have.
Seriously.
We have.
You know, you've been returning Conservative MPs
forever.
in this constituency for a long, long time, and we have not seen the benefits. You know, over the last 5 years. When you talk about road infrastructure and all of those, you know, I have not seen road infrastructure. I've not seen that kind of development here. I can only tell you within the local government settlement, Boston's done worse than other Tory authorities down south. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that, you know, we put Boston and Skegness on the map and we get our fair share. But what we need to be doing is banging doors.
Paul's
and
absolutely
making sure,
right.
because at
But
the end of the day,
unfortunately-
our services will corrode if we don't get the kind of support that we need from central
Paul's
government.
absolutely right, but UKIP is the only party here that can beat the Conservatives, and that's shown throughout the polling.
Well, I want to
You
move
know,
on to...
I'm sorry, they cannot win here.
want to
Well,
move on to...
on the last couple of elections,
Paul,
I've
please.
come above.
Paul, I just want to move on to one more topic, a little speculative thinking here in terms of what might happen after the general election. You're all standing for election to a national legislature, so just talk about a national issue a little bit. Matt, could the Conservative Party work in government in coalition with UKIP?
Well, I think Nigel Farage has said that he doesn't want to work in coalition with anyone, although at the same time he's also said he could imagine doing a deal with Ed Miliband. So these things are inevitably a two-way process. What I say is, if we look at this as a serious question, it's not about what kind of coalition do you want, because if you ask people on the doorstep, what's the last thing you want? The two things they say are, we don't want Ed Miliband as Prime Minister, and we don't want a coalition government.
But they don't want
again.
David Cameron
So,
either.
well, that's simply
Because he
not
never
true.
won the last election, did he? He had to go in with the he had to go in with the Liberals.
Nor did Gordon Brown, Paul, to be fair. Nigel Farage, if he said that he'd be happy to work with Labour, would Ed Miliband be happy to work with Nigel Farage?
All I can say at this stage, we'll see what May the 8th brings, and until May the 8th, we're going out on our own, and we're going out to win as many seats as we can to be the government of this country. And then we'll see what happens on May the 8th, and then we'll make kind of decisions.
We're imaginative, knowledgeable people. We can make a little bit of a speculation of what the scenarios might be.
What kind of Britain do we want? Because I want a Britain which is about fairness, transparency and that. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure whether these two parties are going to deliver the kind of policy.
That's not the answer to my question.
Are they going to give proper justice for low-income families?
Going back to coalition.
Please, Robin, which as a UKIP were you to be elected, which party would want to go in?
We won't do a coalition deal with anybody. That Nigel Farage has made that quite clear. But what we would do is a supply and demand deal whereby we would support a minority, whether it be Conservative government or Labour government, on the budget, for example, providing we get what we want in return. And the first thing on the table, negotiating table, would of course be an in-and-out, free, fair referendum on the European Union.
If I can just come in on that, one of the key things that we're all facing is the disillusionment with politicians, is the trying to say to people, we will deliver what we say we will deliver, is a real battle. And I think the one thing that will actually go against that is another coalition, because no one votes for a coalition. What I want to be able to say is, here are some policies, let's vote, let's be able to deliver.
I'll tell you what people want.
It's profoundly undemocratic.
But democracy isn't about that.
People want politicians who only have one job as well. We've got too many politicians who've got too many jobs, and they've been
Nobody wants politicians who only know politics, who've been, researchers at the age of 22.
But you want politicians who've actually lived in the real world and done some experience. I've been working in the real world for over 40 odd years, and I've got a health of background.
This is my
community work. Well, and I've lived in
This
the
is my
constituency for the last 24
my
years.
family go back generations
and I've
in
been
this
fighting for the people
constituency.
for this area.
My family have the vote.
Just forgive me, but I just wanted to go back to that point. People are disillusioned with politicians, you've said, and I think that's agreeable. But the Conservative seems to have problems with not paying, its supporters not paying their tax. The Labour Party seems to have similar problems, it's revealed as well. And the UKIP is full of people saying crazy things. Very quickly.
That's not quite true.
Very quickly, do we just need a new leadership completely?
No.
Yes or no, Matt?
I think what we
Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That's all we have time for in this hot topic. I hope you'll join me for the next one. For now, goodbye.